the sake of all beings, wisdom, compassion, non-clinging awareness. Sadhu. This afternoon at 3 o'clock, I'd like to suggest a Sangha sharing, and if it's sunny, it'll be down here. If it's raining, it'll be up there. The forecast is for sunny, clearing. And if, just in case any of you are unfamiliar with the term Sangha sharing, it's something that we began to experiment with years ago, and now it's become part of the woodwork. And it's for longer retreats where people are basically doing their own work. I mean, we tend to look at meditation as being relatively solitary work. It's valuable to come together with the other beings that you're retreating with and have an opportunity to share something of your experience. And the Sangha sharing is not a time for discussion. It doesn't invite comments or anything. It's a time to speak with as much kind of accuracy and honesty and straightforwardness as you can muster at that moment, and to particularly for today, I'll give a specific example. You might consider, I mean, we've got lots and lots of ideas that are coming up here, but you're not necessarily working with all of them. There's some juicy aspect of, like, what are you actually mainly working with now? Right? It's not a kind of a hour by hour report on everything that's happened since the last Sangha sharing. You just select one thing, right? And so one way of putting this is like, what question am I wrestling with? Right? Exploring, wrestling with, engaging me. You know, it's the kind of the focal adjustment, right, through which I'm living right now. Right? The big thing on my plate. I'm speaking very, very generally, but I'm trying to communicate the feeling for this. Right? It's like this is what I'm working on, right? And in working on this, these are some of the discoveries that I'm making, which feel very fruitful, and possibly these are some of the difficulties that I'm wrestling with in the process of wrestling with this question. Right? And part of it, we spoke the other day about language and being able to express kind of more subtle dimensions of our living experience. And so Sangha sharing is also an opportunity to practice that. It's a time for kind of skillful speaking, and on the part of everyone else at that moment, of deep listening. And you might, when a person's not too familiar with Sangha sharing work and they're not so matured in their meditation practice, it's not uncommon that as they sit in the circle and listen to other people talking about their experience, they don't really listen to that other person, because anything the person says immediately highlights their lack of anything to report or the brilliance of what they're going to report. And so what they're actually doing is they're reflecting on, what am I going to say in the light of what this person's saying, instead of forget about what you're going to say and give all your attention to the person who's speaking. See? And so it's an exercise in deep listening and deep speaking, in a sense, to speak from the heart. Can I come into a place of experience? So I'm talking about this question that I'm following, but can I still feel the reverberation of this question in my organism as I'm speaking, rather than, well, it's not here now, but it was there yesterday, and blah, blah, blah about that. It's quite different than when the person's speaking from their experience. So I see Sangha sharing as not just a little break where you report on what's going on to each other. I see it as a kind of another facet of the retreat. Right? It's another facet of meditative practice. Right? And so I've asked Mary to facilitate this Sangha sharing, and usually begin with just a little sit, and then take refuge together, and perhaps the Bodhisattva Vow, and then we just have a very simple little format where, when the person wishes to speak, they indicate they wish to speak, and everybody else indicates they're really here to listen, and then, in a sense, you speak. And nobody else is going to go, oh, what I wanted to talk about was this, until when you're absolutely, completely finished. Right? And so that allows, by having bracketing, between two bows, so to speak, it allows space for you to pause and reflect, have I said what I need to say? So that you can speak more from an experience rather than having to hurry in. And nobody else has to kind of think, well, are they finished? Or can I say, should I jump in now and offer what I have to offer? If this hasn't happened, then you can just sit. And it's so you can speak from a more contemplative space that way. So 3 o'clock this afternoon. I chose today simply because it's potentially a more busy day in some of the households. So it gives you an opportunity to be here instead of in the busyness of where it is that you're staying. Any questions on that? It'll unfold as you do it. Mary will remind you at the beginning. So, yes? Yeah. It'll be here if the weather's fine. If the weather's not, it'll be up there, same as usual, right? Yeah. Are there any observations or questions or things to bring forward from your ongoing exploration? Right?
I had this experience yesterday and today that when I first heard the word bodhicitta, I think it became fixed in my mind that it was a thing.
Yes.
So it's something that I have to develop or have to have. And now I think it's transforming, and so today I have these words came into my mind. It's not mine. The bodhicitta is not mine, but I'm kind of I can be there is something between that I can be an instrument of that, of bodhicitta, but there is something that I have to, I don't know, some freedom have to happen, some openness have to happen for me to be this instrument. And then I thought about this the healing process, or I thought about the foundation work and this process of refuge, and then I forgot the word, the healing, the second work, this Bodhisattva work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's, purification, healing.
Purification, yeah. So the importance of this purification work to open for this.
Or as I like to say, I'm making a very crummy joke, right? But 100%ing work. Like when you read on the package that it's 100% pure. Right? Pure means 100%, nothing added, no additives, nothing taken out, nothing added. It's purely that. So actually, we could perhaps free ourselves from a lot of confusion about this loaded word of purity and purification, and think of it as like, first of all, there's refuge, and then it's expanding it until it's 100%. It's in other words, like it's the capacity to embrace everything and anything is there. If there's less than the capacity to embrace anything and everything, it's less than 100%. It's not yet pure. Of course, if I say it's impure, then it sounds really awful. You know what I mean? There's the word's loaded by now already in our culture. So I'm not too happy with the idea of purification. Because it seems to invoke for me like a sense of dirtiness or blotch, or and so you're going to kind of wash it and purify it, kind of clean it up or something like that, right? Whereas life actually doesn't need to be washed. It needs to be, if anything, loved or understood or entered into or manifested, right? And so, in a sense, what we're intending with purification, Vajrasattva is a very good image, actually, but it takes a lot of translating to make it make sense in a Western culture. But if in the very literal sense of sattva being, Vajra, unshakable, so we come to this place of refuge in the ground of becoming, in suchness, in the true state of affairs, right? And then the process of familiarizing with being the true state of affairs in a wider and wider range of situations, until eventually that kind of wideness and embracedness can also embrace the not yet arisen, right? The unknown. And one becomes unshakable in that. One becomes unmovable in that. And in that moment of unmovableness, this is to realize Vajrasattva. Right? This is like holds the wisdom and compassion. It's like but it's very symbolic, and it's not the, it would be going backwards, I think, to try and understand what our experience is in terms of Vajrasattva. As if somehow there's this Vajrasattva and we have to interpret it into another experience. Vajrasattva is the Tibetan interpretation of this beyond words experience of life resting in itself, right? Of bodhicitta knowing itself. So this is purification. Sorry, you were just looking for the right word.
That's it, this experience.
I think if we from right at the beginning realized the magnitude of the task in front of us, we'd all get discouraged and give up. And so fortunately we don't. We just sort of see it as little things like, I'm going to get enlightened. That's easy. That's easy peasy. But what on earth is going on here when you've got a here that can take into account 13 billion years of universe unfolding, and countless numbers of species and consciousness and activity, which somehow in the complexity of the activity from a certain perspective gives rise to the sense of I am being active. And then somehow in relationship with other I am being actives can give rise to a new perspective of I can be active, I can do, right, of agency, right? And yet it's all arising out of the movement, and it's not the movement, but isn't anywhere else but the movement. It's a kind of process. It doesn't matter what we name it, it kind of misses it. And when I contemplate this phrase that I shared with you the other day about learning the subtle teaching of mind practice, right? I suppose I could try and rephrase that, and it would be like recognizing questions I never imagined asking about the mystery of how it is I exist. Right? And we don't even ask the questions yet. Like part of the progression in Dharma is not a progression of confident knowledge, but it's more, I mean, that's a way of describing it, but I don't think that's the juice of it. I think the juice of it is a kind of a progression of ever refining, more inclusive, more difficult to pin down avenues of inquiry which now make sense, which before didn't make sense. You couldn't even ask the question. You don't even know how to ask the question. And in order to inquire at this level, we need to know how to inquire with our physiology, with our feelings, with our emotions, with our intellect. It's like we're learning something, and we think, well, how can this be? The stuff that I'm talking about right now is not something that I see anywhere in the public zone. From this point of view, we'd have to say that, pretty much 99% of daily life for human beings is just utter, non-questioning hypnosis delusion. Not a clue, right? But we do have lots of clues. We can do genetic engineering, and we can do surgery, and we can put people on the moon, and we can invent computers and cell phones and all kinds of things, right? But the guts of it we haven't recognized, and that is I wonder if bodhicitta is an expanding, awakening capacity of curiosity and inquiry. I mean, I don't want to leave that as the final definition. I'm not suggesting a new final definition, but it's quite a different angle, right? That gradually this complexity of life has a sense that I'm being done. If you think about it, like when you're in the womb, there's already movement. It's kind of hard to think that your mother's doing the movement. And I think it's kind of hard to really comprehend how you could have had a sense that I am doing the movement. But in the womb, there is kicking, and there is swallowing, and there is sucking, and there is grasping, and there is turning. Right? There's already movement, right? And in a kind of conceptual way, through the eyes of biology, we also suspect that there's movement of circulating blood, and that there's movement of synaptic activities and secretions of hormones and so on. So there's all that level of movement too, which is all beautifully intermeshed, right, giving rise to these larger movements. You suck your thumb in the womb, right? You do all these things. There's all kinds of movement, right? And this is also the type of movements that are happening are also completely in harmony with the process, the chemical process of homeostasis and the process of an immune system that's in action. Right? All of this is like part of a single piece. Okay? And then we come out of the womb and you know, somehow in the continual, not only are we moving, but the activity of the moving stimulates the growing that we're doing. Like if you move in certain ways, it stimulates certain kinds of growings. You know, so I was told all the time I had to stop sucking my thumb, otherwise my front teeth would stick straight out. You know, it's kind of like a threat. You know, like that was not on. So we know that actually, they can gradually, they grow, their teeth grow differently. I mean, I'm using a really kind of simplistic, silly little thing there. But our movement shapes our growing, and what we are growing into facilitates possible movement. Okay? And not only that, but we have an increase, like an explosion of our neural system, communication between the various parts of the organism, right? It's not even communication, I would call it synchronization. It's the kind of the mechanism of synchronization, right? So that this secretion goes along with that speed up of heart contraction and that, you know, and so on. It's like it's all kind of synchronized. Otherwise, what we have is almost like the idea that this sends a message through the nervous system, this guy receives the message, interprets it, decides to do something. It's much more intimate and closely linked. It's more like squish punk. It's like nobody's doing it. It's just happening. Right? But in the process of this increasing synchronization of collaborations, right? You know, you're now born and you're doing these things. You're kicking and swallowing and sucking and reaching and grasping and moving, but you're also now doing it in a world in which there are adults who have an interest in responding to your kicking and grasping and so on, right? So all of a sudden, and our act of seeing, for example, in order to see, it's not just something that goes on in the eyes. For me to see Sally, right, involves my neck muscles going like this and my eyes going like this. Like the seeing is just as much part of the movement of my body as it is a functioning of my eyes. And although we try and explain the senses as if, you know, they're completely separate things, and the light goes in, photons go in, and blah 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 around, bingo, Sally. You know, there's like, right? And as if somehow that's a description of how seeing takes place. But as an organism, you know that the seeing takes place in a way that makes the positioning of your eyes critical. So, seeing Sally, not seeing Sally. Right? I want to see Sally. Right? It's like it's and more than that, it's like there's expectations and so on. So my whole being moving, right? Gradually, there's a sense of this movement. You know, like these kind of movements happen, but I can't do much about my mum's movement. She just picks me up. You know, I think sometimes, our cat doesn't like being picked up that much, right? She wants to be totally in control. She'll jump up when she wants to jump up, but she sort of wriggles out of your hands if you pick her up quite often. And so you get picked up. You get put down, right? Stuff happens to you, and yet there are other collaborations and gradually maybe a sense emerges of a kind of a core self. Right? This is kind of like this proto-self of just the movement, right? Immune and balance and all these things. And then there's kind of like a core self, which is a sense of I kick, which is different than mum touches. Right? Nobody's thinking this. It's not conceptualized at all. right? But it's like when I reach out for something and I want something, I don't just go there with my eyes. I don't just go there with my fingertips. I go there with my whole body. I crawl over there. The baby doesn't think anything of it, you know. Baby just crawls towards the object of interest once they're at the crawling stage. Right? It's just happening, right? And then imagine for a moment, right, the brain, particularly in the brain, right? I mean, they say that our brain doesn't really finish its physical growth and maturation until we're about 20. So there's an awful lot going on in those early years, right? And feedback between the doing that we are and the way the brain and the body develops, right? And so gradually there's a sense of not just I do, but, you know, we begin to have increasingly clear sense of memory and remembered futures. You know, like, in other words, I remember when I did that, this happened, and so then I can go, so I'm doing that, so maybe this is going to happen, right? And so a sense of agency and doing. And so we begin to, and then language is starting to come on as well, speaking, and we kind of connect whole kinesthetic dancings with certain sounds, words, right? And we get rewards for it, right? It starts to build that, because if you get a reward back, like cuddles and caring and happy smiles, or you get back stern voice and rough touch and grimaces, right? You literally begin to move in such a way that leads the whole body, brain, mind community to grow its way into a situation that tends to act this way rather than that way. So we're working with this. So by the time we come to the Dharma, we're already got all this kind of stuff going, right? And we start to see, well, like, what? In this interbeingness that I am, in this interbeingness that we are, right? What am I doing? And what could I do? And in a way, the kind of thematic questions that are running in the sadhana are taking some of this into account. Okay? So, you know, we're going to sit down and we're going to begin to explore. Right? So, first of all, we arrange ourselves in a comfortable posture, right? Something that's more on the strengthening side, simply because when we're feeling weak, we're feeling defensive, and when we're feeling defensive, we're not so explorative. And the key to this is exploring, right? There's the one and only path to the cessation of suffering, to the attainment of right method, to the realization of nirvana, is mindful exploring. That's what he said, sort of paraphrasing a little bit. It's very, very fundamental, right? And so, you know, all we're doing here is recognizing that. So can I do the best I can, arranging my body, arranging my circumstances around me in a comfortable posture. Okay? And then now I'm in as good as I can do. For now, strengthening way of being. Right? Now making friends with my breathing, right? And coming into that sense of kind of openness, friendliness, interest with the rhythms of a move. My body moves. It breathes. Right? We're going really fundamental. Right? And then inviting the whole configuration of body, brain, mind, community, and all that kind of thing with its, this and that, why is this, why is that, to settle, right, into a place that's a bit more still, and at the same time demonstrating a kind of vibrancy of potential responsiveness, because that's what an alive organism does. Right? It's just very simple, very, very ordinary. Right? This is not a Buddhist thing, really. Right? And then contemplating bodhicitta, it's almost like I'm taking this experience that I am, and I'm beginning to have a sense of, I'm feeling, sensing, knowing this as a process that's been going on before I can make sense of me existing, and I suspect will continue on after I can make sense of me existing. Right? So in other words, you start to feel your way into a flow of, as in our language, scientific language, a kind of flow of evolution, life unfolding and evolving and growing and gradually proliferating on a planet waking up, right? Not to, wow, I'm here, hey Mars, right? Not like that, but maybe think of imagine a planet waking up to be able to, what kind of question does an awakening planet engage in? Or what kind of question is this awakening of planet? Right? It's like the organism is like, I don't know. I find this is it's a subtle teaching. I'm going, planet, tell me. Tarchin, you're too crude, more subtle. Come closer. I have to come closer because, come closer. And then we're afraid, because we got all these archetypes, go, and you get swallowed, right? Because you thought it was going to be sort of like this blessed experience, and it turned out to be the wicked witch, right? And so, I'm talking about the pragmatics of doing this exploration, because we have all kinds of subliminal, archetypal fantasies and beliefs and so on we're not really aware of, and which bend and warp and shape and constrain our capacity for vibrant living, for vibrant, curious, engaging, questing. And so we're contemplating bodhicitta. Right? And then gradually, right, as that starts to be a feeling like I'm just sitting, all I'm doing is sitting here breathing, right? Smiling, breathing, present, feeling, right? The kind of stirrings of this mysterious and wondrous process, right? That I am, that we are, that is, that I don't know much about, but feels absolutely tangible. Right? And gradually beginning to touch the earth of this, in a sense, to recognize that this is where I stand, this is my ground. Right? And you have the triple ground, and we have refuge. Right? You're resting in that. And, it's like the child is like it's all over the lot. And then slowly, right, there's gradually, right, not because the child's stupid or reluctant or anything, but because the growing is still happening. It's not like the finished being who's now trying to discover what it's like to be or have an I, right? The functioning described as I-ness hasn't yet really gelled into a coherent and cohesive way, right? And so the functioning is almost like a pre-I-ness, a pre-me-ness, right? It's sometimes kind of there, and then it's kind of not there, You can see this with kids, they're how they're kind of so mercurial in their emotion, kid can be very, very excited and happy and just giddy with kind of excitement about things, and then 2 seconds later they're just bawling their eyes out and completely upset. And quite often, and then you get to an age where the child is really confused about that. It's very kind of confusing. It's kind of a bit embarrassing and so on. You don't know what's going on, right? But if the parent is reasonable, they have some space for that, right? Because the sense of a continent, look, you did this, you just have to wait. You can't reason with kids when they're having a tantrum. Right? Because there's not a consistency of a cohesive I to have the conversation with. There's just different movements. It's chaos, right? In a way, that's what we have to deal with in the adult world today, right? Relative to what we could be, relative to the cohesive clarity we could have as human creatures, right? It's as if, right, what goes on in the Parliament and the House of Representatives and the White House, right, is temper tantrums, right, of completely incohesive, incoherent, pre-formed sense of personhood, right, in relationship with the world. Not there yet. What is this? So we have this kind of sense of movements, and then gradually we are encouraging a sense of a cohesiveness. I'm smiling, I'm breathing, I'm present, I'm appreciating, I'm feeling bodhicitta kind of thing. And out of this is coming an increasing sense that I can manifest a degree of agency. I can do. I can choose to do this practice or not do this practice, or do a different practice, or just leave and go somewhere else, or right. This is a huge, gigantic leap of cohesive collaboration to be able to do that. Even if I can do this, I can wreck the place, I can make them feel stupid, I can, right? I mean, there's all kinds of very negative expressions of this, but think of it in the positive side. It doesn't matter what the expression is, of like nervous system and life growing itself, and it's like an increasingly rich collaboration, right? And so we start to gradually, this sense of refuge is becoming a little bit my refuge here, and there's an increasing recognition that somehow in this mystery, all these different components of the mystery are in this mystery together, right? And I begin to have a sense that it's not enough just to sit and look at the mystery, that somehow I'm called to participate in the mystery. And we come to the Bodhisattva Vow, which is more like the Bodhisattva. First of all, it's an aspiration, and then it's the, kind of a general hope. I hope to be kind and patient and explore stuff and surrender. Pretty unlikely, but I hope to, And then gradually, you're beginning to feel that this is more than a hope. There's kind of like a strong determination to do this, even though you kind of wander off and lose the plot again and again and again. And so it becomes, instead of the bodhisattva aspiration, it's the bodhisattva determination. I'm determined to do this, and then you fail. Right? But that's, at least when you're determined, you're at least taking a few steps, And then gradually, this kind of cohesion and integrativeness of body, speech, and mind, and self, and other, and so on, comes to the point where it feels that it becomes a vow. I will do this. Right? And then gradually, right, our capacity to do this becomes so rich that it dawns on us that I am doing this effortlessly. It's become the disposition of my being. right? This is my disposition. I don't even have to try, and it just happens. And this is Bodhisattva realization, Bodhisattva vow, Bodhisattva disposition, Bodhisattva aspiration, all can be expressed in the same way. And so, this is like very much like, what am I doing in my practice? I'd like to make it, I'm making lots of detours here, I'll make another one. And that is, for some of you who have been exploring Dharma for a long time, this doesn't so much pertain to, but for some of you who are, by comparison, relatively new in years, right? It's valuable to keep in mind, right, that these are basically just some kind of general supports, right, to enrich your experience of being in the detail of the here and now. So it's not like you're spending your whole day thinking about bodhicitta and the whole universe unfolding, and that's what you're supposed to be doing. You just end up scattered, right? It's really valuable if you can have some very concise form that you're working. Maybe what you're working on is smiling, breathing, and present. And then you work your posture, your contemplation of bodhicitta, your refuge, your bodhisattva vow, right? In the context of this sitting in this place, on the inhalation all the way in, on the exhalation all the way out, right? You're really giving attentiveness to the minutiae of whatever it is you choose to look at. I mean, it could be a kind of anapanasati support. It could be a satipatthana kind of support. It could be a visualization mantra support. It could be a Tai Chi, physical movement, leandering support. I mean, it could be lots of different ways, but you'll have, like, just work with what feels doable and meaningful and interesting for you, right? And then let these, this is an attempt to actually encourage a more full view of the whole process of our awakening. But actually, you don't awaken by fussing about the whole process of your awakening. Right? You awaken one lift at a time. You know what I mean? And then so don't worry about the profound meanings of this. It's like take it at the level that means something to you. I think it is likely to mean something to you, right? And it's not an intellectual meaning. It's kind of like an emotional, felt sense meaning. Like this is like, I'm going to meet beings like this, right? Whatever that is. There's a feeling in that of what it means to meet beings with kindness and interest. Right? So we're coming into when you're stating the Bodhisattva vow, it's like, right? However innumerable beings are, however innumerable sensing animate organisms are. This is what a being, when we talk about beings, right? Sensing animate organisms, right? But also beings are even more than that. Right? Because a thought is being a thought, and a rock is being a rock, right? And you begin to have a sense that your beingness, which is this dynamic, kinetic, kinesthetic, sensing animate organism in the process of growing itself into whatever it's growing itself into. Right? This is your sense of your being. Right? This is a being. Right? how often do we, when we say however innumerable beings are, and we say, oh yeah, like there's other people and trees and so on, do we see the being the way we experience our being, or do we see the being as an appearance, a kind of conceptual small part of our being? Like for me, this is the whole world is here, right? And so I wonder if when I say beings, I could be referring to someone for whom the whole world is there. 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 Right? As our living, growing brings forth an understanding, how can we talk about the being unless we include their curiosity and question? But you don't see the being when we say beings, and we immediately see a mirror image or a photograph or a picture. We're relying, basically, we define the universe in terms of sight and in terms of words. Those are our two main ways of describing the universe. And sight is a distant thing. Oh, the tree's over there. Even though when I examine it, I can't really see how an over there can be separate from the process which is giving rise to a sense of an over there. Right? So when we say, however innumerable beings are, right, I begin to see, first of all, that we're all growing into a being which hasn't yet been. So between beginning to recite the Bodhisattva Vow and finishing the reciting of the Bodhisattva Vow, the beings that I'm referring to have already changed. Not only that, but each one of those beings feels surrounded and supported by countless numbers of beings. And to talk about their being, for me to talk about your being, without considering the fact that your beingness to you is a feeling of being supported or not supported by countless numbers of beings, is for me not to actually see your being. Huh? And when you think that actually you're looking back at me, and you're seeing the beings that you're seeing are my beings, and we're all growing and we're all changing, and this whole dancing is going on. So you thought it was difficult. Bodhicitta was hard to grapple with. This is way more. The whole thing's just so dynamic, right? And so we go, I give up. It's immeasurable. This word immeasurable means that you can't measure it, right? Because the yardsticks, the meter sticks, the tape measures, the timers that we're using are themselves sensing animate, organistic, or organismic processes which themselves are growing and changing as we go. Okay? And so it's like we're recognizing that this is unending. This is not something I can do and be done with. Because it's immeasurable, I'll just have to keep doing this. Right? However immeasurable beings are, I aspire, I'm determined to, I vow to, I am, right? Touching them, meeting them with kindness and interest. Okay? However inexhaustible the states of suffering are, I'm touching them with patience and love. We spin through this, Innumerable beings are kindness and interest, or exhaustible states of suffering are patience and love. Now go on with the meditation. But it may be I go, however innumerable. Oh my God. 2 hours later, that theme of contemplation gradually peters out and you get to the next beings. Oh my God. Are. Right? It's like being's existence, like what is, like with a curious inquisitiveness that goes deep. I've penciled in a few little things here, which I can't see without my glasses. Right? To meet them with kindness, like kinda is child. Kin, it's like kinship. Kindness has something to do with the way we would be with a child in a healthy situation, it also has a sense of relationship, like we are related to each other, we are kin. Right? How do you know kinship? Paternal kind of, it's like they do DNA analysis. And it's all statistical, If it's within a certain percentage range, they say, oh, you're kin. And if it's outside the percentage range, they say, no, there's no indication you're kin. Right? But actually, if you take it just a little bit further, expand the range a bit, and we're not that much different from chimpanzees. And, I share 50% kinship with a banana. I like that one. It's kind of goofy. Right? So in a sense, like kindness, a kind of natural kindness, like just think for a moment of the scale of felt responsibility that you have in your life. I've reflected on this many times, and I'm quite astonished at myself. I have been, right? I'm working to try and undo this, right? We have this huge aspiration of kind of universal loving kindness to all beings and so on. But I realized that, like, if my sister phones me up, and I never talk to her, maybe once a year or something, we'll send a happy birthday to each other and that's it. But if she did, in theory, called up and said, help, I guess I'd respond. I'm not so sure if someone in Ethiopia who I didn't know phoned and said help, that I would respond in the same way. I'm not sure if I would jump on a plane and fly to Addis Ababa immediately and try, and I've wondered, Tarchin, what is this? How come? All this kind of work on being kind of equal to everybody, and yet, do you know what I'm talking about, right? It's just like it feels like we're kind of got these elastic bands from our hearts to our hearts, and you sort of stretch apart and then pull us together. And others, you're connected with everyone, but it seems like some beings you're more connected with. And I feel much more gushy and mushy and kind of start talking like I'm talking to a child, right? When Greycoat comes by, buzz, 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 right? Than I do when I'm having a bit of slime mold coming by. like really, I just, ooh, fungus, ooh, nice little fungus. I confess I don't do that. I don't have the same thing, right? And if we were to look, it's not just genetics. I think that's making a mistake, but it gives us a way of speaking, of kinship. Like I've got all kinds of biological experience more in common with a cat, right, than I do in common with the banana or in common with the fungi, right? And maybe more in common with my sister, than because the biology of my life is not just my genetics, it's also the shared lived experience, right? And so we both grew our nervous systems surrounded by adults who were somewhat similar. I say that because her mother and father were different than my mother and father. My mother and father, right, were 7 years younger than her mother and father. Right? So, but it's similar, very similar, right? And so, kindness, why do I feel more kind towards her or to Puss, right, than I do to some other, right? And gradually, and we could say, well, it's got something to do with our sense of family, our sense of kinship, our sense of shared base. But if we could expand our feeling of beings so that we increasingly have a felt sense of being in this together, more so, our sense of kinship will expand, Oh, I'll protect all white Anglo-Saxon Protestant males, but if we get any critique from all these uppity females, right, we'll get together and put them down, right? You got cliques and cults and prejudice, bigotries and all this kind of stuff comes up. Right? So I'm aspiring actually to meet innumerable beings. I'm eventually going to run out of wasps. If I want to do the innumerable beings, I'm going to have to meet with some Catholics. I'm going to have to meet with, right? You know what I'm saying? You're, in a sense, if you're going to follow this one, right, inevitably you have to begin to meet with beings who possibly you wouldn't have met with unless you were willing to put yourself out. Don't travel. If you don't want to meet anyone kind of different than you, close your eyes and plug your ears and grit your teeth and wear thick padded clothing, right? And there's a chance you won't have a sense of meeting anyone different. Right? But as we begin to open up and become more aware, it's there. Meeting with kindness and this kind of natural inquisitiveness and curiosity, which is very precise and playful. Interest. Right? So I'm sitting here, I'm just smiling, breathing, present, right? And can I meet this breath with kindness and interest? Right? Like with the... When I meet with my sister, I don't think about genetics. I don't think about, how many degrees close to me or removed from me this person is. Right? That's not the kindness. I'm just using this intellectual stuff as a way of illustrating the richness of this. But when we're just there, it's like you're just there. Okay? You think you're meeting with a stranger you've never met before. It's different than when you meet with someone who you know really well and you've maybe shared life journey with. Right? There's a kind of a... I might as well mime it because it's not really words. It's not a conceptual thing. The feeling, the texture of our beingness with them is different. The way we use our senses, our curiosity, so on and so forth. Right? So, I'm putting this into action. Right? This is the way I intellectually know that in a world that's fully interconnected, in a world that is in the process of coming into being, that's gestating continuously, this is a sane thing to do. What should I do? Well, do in a way that meets all beings with kindness and interest. Right? However inexhaustible the states of suffering are, I vow to touch them, right, with patience and a capacity to accept the legitimacy of them coexisting along with my living. We live together. Right? An extraordinary thing. Right? I love you to be the being I love to love. Right? Just don't get me upset by being the being you want to be unless it's congruent with the being that I love to love. And so we've got an awful lot of love going on in our culture that's got nothing to do with the being. It's just got to do with our hormones, right? Our feel-good hormones, like if I feel good, I say, oh, I love it, right? And I don't, not necessarily having the slightest interest in that which I say I'm loving, which is really a being who's just magically, their living, meeting with your living, becomes a kind of metaphorical key that opens the heart of your aliveness. And you, in this, by engaging with this being in this way, right? This is a wonderful thing. Right? Patience, right? To recognize increasingly that wheels within wheels, the universe, everything has its own timing. Right? Plants take so long to germinate, seeds take so long to germinate. This is it's like my wishing it would go faster doesn't really make it go any faster, and my wishing that something was a different timing than it naturally is my experience that I call impatience. So it's coming out of it. So this could be, maybe I'm working on this one, you know, there's a tendency to, could I touch and be touched? You know, I want to understand suffering so that I can heal it and get rid of it and fix it. But I don't want to be touched by it. But actually you can't meet anything without being, you know, what if I touch this wooden object is touching me. Right? I mean, it's just how you're describing it. However incomparable this mystery of interbeing, right? Excuse me, however immeasurable the dharmas are, I vow to explore them, right, deeply and thoroughly. So we're going kind of meeting, touching, exploring. It's almost, this is a way you could think of like as a deepening process that's going here, and finally surrendering, right? This incomparable mystery of interbeing. I think historically the Bodhisattva Vow was that some of the earliest forms of it are attributed to Huineng, who was a Chinese Zen Chan master, right? Sometimes referred to as the sixth patriarch. And in the Platform Sutra, which was a teaching that was recorded and we still have available to us today, I think it's one of the earliest renditions, if you like, of the Bodhisattva Vow. And in that earliest rendition, it went differently. It went, however innumerable beings in my mind are, I vow to save them. However inexhaustible the states of suffering in my mind are, I vow to extinguish them. Right? However immeasurable the dharmas in my mind are, right, I vow to master them. And however incomparable the Buddha truth, I vow to attain it or realize it. That's it. Right? And for years, you know, in the process, and the reason why it's called a vow is that for some beings, they contemplate this, they work on it, and they begin to really feel that at that stage in their journey, this is the most important and valuable thing they could do, would be to cultivate their living along the themes of these four expressions. And so they might like to, in a sense, take it from being a kind of personal thing, and it's like using the Buddha once said there's two things that protect the universe, hiri and ottapam, right? These are Abhidhamma categories, right? And when you hear what they mean, you'll be horrified, right? Because it means moral shame and moral dread, right? It's hiri and ottapam. It's the classical translation of those two cetasikas. And it's referring to like that quality of being that feels bad about doing what you know is bad, and feels ashamed of being seen to be doing bad what you know is bad, right? So you're working in a sense with the outer constraints of your community, right? I mean, it's kind of like it's all right to be a criminal as long as you can get away with it, right? But that's referring to maybe the I can't remember which one was which actually, the hiri or the ottapam, this pair, right? But you know, you may not have any kind of moral shame, you know, doesn't, as long as you can get away with it, it's fine. But you do have moral dread, right? That I don't want anyone to catch me. Right? So sometimes that keeps a person from causing too much grievous damage, right? And sometimes the person maybe doesn't really care too much about what the law says or what the culture says. You know, they're kind of impervious to that. But they've got their own set of kind of moral kind of boundaries. You know, I couldn't do that. And if they go over that edge of their own personal moral boundary, they feel crappy. Right? That's kind of there. And so sometimes in the journey, it starts to feel not enough to just privately have this determination. I need more strength in this, and so I announce it to the community of beings that I value, my friends on the path of life. And so then there would be, you would take the Bodhisattva vow, right, in a public kind of more formal sense, right, in front of a teacher who's not a teacher unless you actually see them as a teacher, in which case you've got some respect and some valuing of them, so they become a, I don't really, if I kind of really screw up and mess up, I don't really mind too much if my friends on the path notice it, but I don't want Rinpoche to find out. You know what I mean? It's like it's all levels, right? But one might say, I take this vow, right? However innumerable beings are, I vow to meet them with kindness and interest. And then you're stuck with it, because every time you don't do that, and it's apparent to other people around you, so you've got an outer kind of nudging to work on this. You've got an inner nudging to work on this. Hence, the kind of formality of it. But that's just taking a ceremony doesn't do this. It's kind of an inner felt sense of this is what, surely the question comes in an interbeing universe of ecological ground and ancestral ground and mentor teaching ground interwoven into a single ground of growing becoming, where there's activity and then there is a sense that I am active, and then there's I can be active, and so the question comes up, so if I can be active, what should I do? And gradually coming to not the details, right, but what kind of qualities of the doing, because the quality of the doing shapes the growing that I'm becoming. When we talk about lifelong learning, that makes lots of sense to people. But if we said lifelong growing, that doesn't make so much sense to people, but to me it's exactly the same. If you're learning, you're growing. It's just a bit more subtle, right? You don't get any longer, or it might chub up a bit or thin down a bit, right? But there's a fantastic amount of growth and change taking place at the kind of micro level, right? Kind of rearrangings of connections and so on. Smiling, breathing, present, appreciating offering, I abide continuously in this heartfelt aspiration, allowing it to become well established and unshakably firm. And that you could say, in a way, you could make a parallel and say that increasing appearance of unshakable firmness in this aspiration is an increasing visceral approaching of what is referred to as Vajrasattva. Without ever hearing of Vajrasattva, without ever doing a single 100-syllable mantra. Are there any thoughts or questions? Each section is just monumentally huge, right? And yet, in the end, Stephen, you're just smiling, breathing, present. Sit with it for an hour, walk with it for an hour, sit with it for an hour, have some lunch, go for a walk, sit with it for an hour, walk with it for an hour, and maybe once a day review the text, because the text is just kind of a general kind of enthusiasm map. So, in a sense, like a kind of a poetic, an attempt of kind of poetic enthusiasm making for bringing some refinement of questioning right into the detail of breath by breath, walking meditation, sitting. Right? This is how we approach the palace of Samantabhadra. questions or thoughts? Yeah.
Sometimes, in the midst of inquiring, it can feel a little bit almost like, the ground that you stand on is kind of moving, or kind of...
It is. It is. It's measurably moving, yes.
As well as not just not the physical ground, but
yeah.
theoretical.
I understand.
And it can feel a little bit sort of, uncomfortable, a little bit, almost nausea. And then there's some pleasure in it, but then there's also a sense of wanting a break from that.
Yeah.
But then having a break from that feels like just falling back on whatever was there before. So it just sets up this pattern in my mind of having a break from that is a waste of time, or like not progressing or something.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's just inevitable that we bring the baggage or the let's get rid of the word baggage. We bring a disposition for certain attitudes that aren't just merely ours. They're our society and collective, and in a sense our relationships with others and so on. You can hardly claim that they're yours. They're not yours, but they're right. And so like of doubt, of negative response to uncertainty, or not knowing, or the ground shaking, or these kinds of things, and so part of, in a way, to treat human beings as animate organisms who are only animate as long as they're organisms, and they're not only organisms as long as they're animate, and that the thinking and the knowing and the perceiving and the experiencing is an expression of this animism, of this movement, of the moving. It all is growing out of one piece. It's just, nobody talks about that in our culture. We talk about, you're a child, and then you're an adolescent, then you're an adult, and then you get a job, then you settle down, then you retire, and then you die, or you play golf, and then you retire, right? And I mean, we've got all these stories, and it doesn't matter how complex the story compared to the universe of the dancing of a universe which is giving rise to every little moment. It doesn't matter. Our most complex story is just a clunky, simplistic cartoon of what's going on. And first of all, take up, arrange yourself in a comfortable posture. And so there's a sense of the question is well, what gives me a sense of strength? And a lot of people, we have to work. You can't work from your body to your mind. You have to work from your mind to your body, because what I mean by that is your kind of conceptual universe is so strong. It kind of, the glare, the light, it's so bright that it kind of makes what's going on in your body invisible. You don't notice anything, and so. We think in terms of, comfort means a soft chair or an expensive bed, or having lots of likes on your Facebook page, or being popular, or having my parents' approval, or, these are all very complex psychological configurations of relationship. And so we've become, in a sense, we've reduced our sense of well-being to purely that, ignoring all the other aspects of our well-being, which is in a sense, my psychological relationships with other human beings could be described like this. And then meanwhile, you go down into my roots and whoa, it goes out into a 4 billion year old biosphere that's unfolding, and taking into account countless, how many trillions of bacteria are living in your guts, right? And without which you wouldn't be, and so on and so forth, right? What I'm saying is that the process that we are at that level is huge, and yet it's eclipsed by this. So part of our beginning to question is we begin to, oh my God, you know, and so we're actually having to learn to skill, right, in walking on that edge between allowing the rug to be movable, you know, pull the rug out from under you kind of thing, allowing it to be movable but not pulling the rug out, because when you pull the rug out you freak out. When you're freaked out you're not fortable, you're not feeling strong, you're feeling really weak. And so, you know, if you look at this, it's quite delicate actually. There's a kind of a balance that's happening here, and so that's why at the beginning we have to work with conventionalities. So you have a period of practice, and then you have a bit of a gap and a break. Right? You have a period of practice, and you have a bit of a gap and a break. Right? And you begin to recognize that you know, you have a theme that you're working on in your practice, and then your mind wanders off to some extraneous thing, and it seems like you lose the breadth of the practice. And you just notice that the mind's wandering and reconnect with the breadth of the practice. No big deal, right? And then you know, sometimes it wanders, and then it kind of, the wandering is like wandering over the edge of a precipice, right? Like the ground drops out from underneath you, and you, right? And so, well, if you can, just kind of embrace the and look into it, right? I mean, just look into it. Just sort of see if you can explore that. It's not a problem that's preventing you from doing what you should be doing. This is what you should be doing. But sometimes you can't. Or put it this way, it ain't happening. You know, you're not looking at it. You're actually just desperate. I'm looking at it, but it's still there. You know, it's just our inquiry into it isn't going anywhere. And so at that stage, then the first one is just to notice it and kind of just background wandering, come back to the exercise. Second one is set aside the theme you were working on and really kind of explore how your body, mind, inner and outer, how this comes into being, right, if you can. And then if you can't do that, right, then setting that aside and going for a walk or doing something totally different, right, so that you can, and then in the so that you can support a space in which you remember what it means to be comfortable, right? And then you go, now come back to your work. Because without the arrange yourself in a comfortable posture, you can't do this work. And when you think of like, arrange yourself in a comfortable posture means you've got to have so much excess cash available at the bank. Without that, you don't feel comfortable, right? In order to feel really comfortable, right, you have to have a tracking anklet on your teenage kid, right? So that you know where they're going and what they're doing at all times, right? Otherwise, I don't feel comfortable about what my, right? Right? So we try to, our idea of what our culture is full of, I don't feel comfortable unless I've got the biggest nuclear arsenal in the world, then I can feel more comfortable, right? Our definition of comfort is so limited that it doesn't take very much to wobble it and the person feels uncomfortable again, and then our response is to grab at what we think would be comfortable. Whereas the skilled practitioner is one who's gradually beginning to learn, right? This process that I talked about, these 3 steps, are not just some little beginner's practice, right? How to deal with hindrances or difficulties in meditation. It's actually a kind of extraordinary age that we become more and more skilled in how we meet with the unknown, because the unknown always has a sense of It's like the unknown is kind of awakening. It's like, it wakes us up. If you're walking down the street and you see someone who you think you know and it's someone who you really like, you approach this person who you can't really see. You've just made the summation that you know them, right? If you see someone coming towards you who you don't know and is dressed in a way which is completely out of character with the type of people you normally hang around with, right? Then just the way you walk towards them will be completely different, right? You're kind of like, got this. And so, in a sense, because they're unknown, you don't know who they are, so you're kind of on edge. Should I jump this way? Can I do that? Will I run away? Will I grab it? What am I going to do? Until finally you go, now I know what it is. There was an American philosopher, I guess, public figure, Alan Watts, and he wrote a book called The Wisdom of Uncertainty. Nice title. Right? And so the sense of part of our work is we're learning to live on this edge of not having to be so certain, whilst at the same time having an immense repository of skills to be able to kind of move depending on how it indicates. It's red. We go this way. No, it's green. I'll go that way. It's big, or it's small, or it's violent, or it's sleepy, right? And so we're literally in our training, in our meditation. Don't think it's the meditation, I can't do it because I'm blocked by this. This is the meditation of learning, like knitting the whole system together through the doing to be able to live on this cresting wave of now, this cresting wave of not knowing the next moment, and to basically be able to do it well. Right? So there's no value in trying to explode your view and sort of. Rinpoche once said, I could introduce you all to the Transcendental in one weekend, but you'd all be incurably insane, right? The truth doesn't set you free. I show you the truth, and the truth alone will set you free, right? Freedom is a way of living, and your living in freedom is the freedom that sets you free. Right? It's like we're growing ourselves into this. We're developing ourselves into this, and I'm fully cognizant that if someone had said this to me 40 years ago, right, as I wrestled with aspects, it would have been kind of modestly inspiring, and then I would have forgotten about it in the hurly-burly of meeting with my own demon, right? But nevertheless, it's a sense, it would have been a nice support. Right? Rinpoche said these things, but he said them in a very kind of what felt like a confronting character sometimes. Drop it. Right? And when he was very gentle with it, I didn't believe him. I somehow believed him when he worked himself up and did this big show of authority. But when he was kind of being more straightforward and just there, and then you say something gently, it was almost like, I don't believe it, or I kind of like, well, it was not so serious, it's like, because part of me was like, I don't do anything unless I'm forced to, or I'm scared to death, right? And I hadn't yet discovered the innate inquisitiveness and curiosity of my own mind, which is very precise and playful at the same time. So that I didn't need to be curious because someone said I should be curious, but I was curious because I couldn't stop being curious, because it felt like it was just me being me. Right? And the practice of Dharma involves the process of moving from a place of dysfunction to a place of greater function. The idea that the practice of Dharma, if we have any dysfunction, it proves we're not practicing Dharma, is kind of absurd. There wouldn't be any teaching. If everyone was enlightened, there wouldn't be any teaching. Do you need to rephrase that, or is that good for now? So, may the day be well, and the night be well, and the midday hours bring happiness too. May success in our meditation be well, and may our failure in meditation be well, and may everyone that we meet be well, and may all the beings that we wish we'd meet but we don't meet, may they be well, and may the wishing be well, and may the drifting be well, and may it all be well by the blessing of the Triple Gem. May all be auspicious. Mm-hmm.